Welcome to this MERICS media briefing on the National People's Congress. I am Claudia Wessling, Director Communications and Publications at MERICS, and I welcome you all to today's briefing. We have great speakers with us today. Nis Grünberg is a lead analyst in our Politics and Society program. We have Jacob Gunter with us, a lead analyst from our Economics program. And last but not least, Antonia Hamaidi, senior analyst from the Science, Technology and Innovation program. And we're going to talk about, you all know it, it's two-session season again, starting from March 4th. The Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, CPPCC, will convene in Beijing. And one day later, China's legislature, the National People's Congress, will begin its annual gathering, the third session of the 14th National People Congress. This all happens in challenging times. I don't have to tell you that. Also, China has many tasks to tackle. Economic growth remains sluggish. Geopolitical tensions with the United States under Donald Trump, first and foremost, threaten China's export-oriented economic model and its ambitious innovation goals. As always, Xi Jinping and his government can be expected to use the meeting, the NPC, to send encouraging signals to the population. They will set the economic direction, lay out spending plans, including those for the military. Many developments will be important to watch as they might affect our relations to China further down the line. So, what will be on the agenda at this year's NPC and how will China set its priorities in 2025? In the next hour, our three experts will present a few key assessments, and of course you will get time for questions afterwards. Nis will kick us off, and then Jacob will talk a little bit about the course China's economy is taking, and Antonia will talk about the role of the private sector, always considered a driver of innovation in China. And there was a lot of reporting recently that the private sector was going to be supported better in the future in China. But first of all, briefly on the Q&A, you will get, of course, the chance to answer, to ask us questions. You can either use the raise hand function on Teams, or you can just write in the chat, whatever you prefer. Everything said here is on the record. Our colleagues would alert you or would say it if they wanted something to be off the record. Okay, that said, let me hand it over to Nis for his first introduction into what we can expect at this year's NPC. Nis, over to you.
Thank you, Claudia, and welcome everybody to this beautiful morning in Berlin, at least. NPC, sorry, there's someone not muted. NPC and CPPCC season is on, as you said, Claudia, the two meetings. We thought it's going to be interesting for you maybe to get a little bit of the context, and I don't mean the international context here, but the Chinese context, so the position that Beijing sees itself in as volatility globally is picking up, and challenges at home are not really ceasing as well. So the NPC this year will really be in the context of continuing to de-risk China's rise and really hardening its posture against global uncertainties. That's the main theme, and it has been for a couple of years now. But this entire uncertainty that is arising in Europe and the US towards China is really just encouraging Beijing to double down on this posture. Of course, I don't need to say this, probably deepening the partyification, so the party leadership, the role of the party and the core of the party, Xi Jinping, to steer this whole process is, of course, more important than ever to the leadership. It's the only way forward in the documents, in the speeches, so we'll see more of that. No change here. The structural challenges that China is facing, especially in the economy, Jacob will talk a bit more towards that, they remain the same. And the reforms and the approaches that we've seen over the past weeks and months are really just tweaks rather than change to the system. So there might be speculations about big stimulus, about changes to structural issues, but we don't really expect big movements to happen in this period of time, but more steady as she goes type of tweaking the system. Beijing doesn't want surprises. They want change, but it's really difficult for them to pull off these big structural changes that are maybe necessary. We've been looking at the third plenum last year, and this is the first NPC after the plenum, and it issued, as you probably know, a big document, the decision of the third plenum, with a few dozens of huge policy packages, or at least policy prescription issues. And we have 5 main trends here that we like to focus on, which we think are probably going to steer this year and the next few years more than the others of the big issues that are also mentioned in the report or in the resolution. So state capitalism and party guidance, really doubling down on the role of the public economy, of the party as the guiding power behind politics. Tax and public finance overall, this is going to be a very big discussed issue, probably behind the doors during the NPC, because of course local officials who are the front lines of implementation, they are going to Beijing with asking for more money for all the demands that Beijing has set. So I think without bigger answers yet to where property tax is going, how public financing will be changed, I think this is going to be a big topic for the next months. Of course, technology is really big in the news also. The leadership is really focusing on tech. Antona will focus a bit more on that in her part here. So I'll leave it at that here. Long-term investments into innovation and talent. This is also really a long-term kind of a goal. I think it's safe to say that in the work report and also in the upcoming 5-year plan, this is going to be a big topic. And of course, political loyalty and social stability. Probably worth mentioning here is that the CPPCC, which is headed by Wang Huning, the chief ideologue and one of the guys in the standing committee, he'll open the truth sessions, the season of truth sessions on the 4th, a day ahead of the NPC, with a speech that will likely include a lot of language on party leadership, on loyalty to party leadership, really setting the tone here for the importance the party and the leadership puts on loyalty. Next slide, please. So just a little bit on the choreography of the whole theater for those who don't follow this year after year. On March 4th, the CPPCC opens is opened by Wang Huning. This is the consultative conference where all the non-party and non-state actors who, they have delegations, minorities, private companies, associations, and so on, they'll meet. On March 4th, Li Qiang, the premier, will open the NPC formally and deliver his work report. Around 2,130 deputies from 35 local or constituency delegations will join and listen to the reporting or the reading of the government reports, which includes new GDP targets, the budget by the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Spending, and so on. The NDRC will deliver usually a very important socio-economic development report, which is has a bit more meat on development and economic implementation targets. So the first days will go with this. The whole event will spend usually around a week or a little bit longer with presenting reports, deliberation in the teams. Xi Jinping will visit several delegations probably. He used to go to the Inner Mongolia one first, but now we don't really know. There's going to be a lot of tea leaf reading as to where he goes. Is it Zhejiang province? And that means new productive forces will continue. So a lot of tea leaf reading will commence from this, and that might be some new foundational laws on the agenda that will be deliberated and adopted. A lot of noise around the private economic promotion law that has been discussed in the standing committee of the NPC. It's not clear if this will be passed by the NPC. It's possible, but certainly this will will stir a lot of discussion. What's the role of the private economy? How much promotion vis-a-vis the state sector will it really get? How about stimulus packages and so on? And not least, possibly some information or some news on a new Minister of Foreign Affairs. Possible, but not certain. And I think with that, I pass over to Jacob.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. Skip ahead on the slides.
Yeah, the table will be in the presentation for use later. We'll send it out, and this is based on past sessions.
Good. So heading off from Nice, the sort of looking at the economic policy agenda, kind of starting from that big picture perspective, what I think we are likely to see is a remarkable level of continuity. And I know that for a lot of journalists in the room, continuity is not a terribly attractive headline to be able to throw out there. But I would contextualize it that continuity, considering the economic downturn and the internal and external struggles that China is dealing with, is actually quite remarkable. It shows a lack of sort of a willingness to be receptive to the needs of households and consumers, and to instead kind of hold fast on the direction that things are moving in, irrespective of these tempests around the system. So I'm going to focus on three kind of main points. The first being what our expectations are for some of the big numbers and growth targets and things like that. Second, I'll kind of walk you through how I'm using the Central Economic Work Conference from last December as a guide for what to expect on economic policy. And then third, I'll jump into kind of the political economy and ideology aspect, which is increasingly important for local officials to be able to understand the direction that the party wants things to move in, the direction that Xi Jinping wants things to move in, and therefore that they will be expected to move in themselves. So starting with the sort of some of the headline numbers that we expect. Every year at MERICS, we go through the two sessions of the provincial governments, which happens in the preceding weeks, to try to look at what their individual provincial and municipal targets are for the coming year. We then give that kind of a weighted average. So, small economy provinces don't have the same weight as, Guangdong or Zhejiang or something. And what we generated this year was about 5.25%, all when added up. And usually Beijing sets the target a little bit lower than what the weighted average is of the provinces. So I would anticipate probably we will hear, as we did last year, around 5%. So they don't commit to a firm number anymore. If it goes a little bit lower than that, that wouldn't be too surprising to match the general decrease that we saw across those provincial targets. Probably around 5.5% again for unemployment. There is some hype about the kind of the pretty widespread presence from those provinces in their respective two sessions meetings and reports of trying to push for services as a way to drive consumption growth. But I think skepticism is pretty warranted that we're not going to see a huge surge in services and a shift away from the kind of aggressive real economy industrial policy priorities of the government, with the exception being that in cases where there's high issues or high levels of unemployment in certain parts of the country, I could see that kind of being the economic baseline that must be held and maybe a push for services there. But I would not expect anything from the NPC to come out that will really meaningfully shift that policy away from industrial policy and towards boosting consumption in meaningful, sufficient ways. Secondly, moving on to the Central Economic Work Conference, which is the annual party planning session that happens every December. So this is when the party gets together and decides for the next year, what is the economic policy agenda going to be? Now, the NPC is a state function, and the state function is downstream from party functions. So when we look at what happened in December, what the party says is a really, really good indicator for what is going to be the priorities and what's going to happen at the NPC. So if we can move to the next slide. So sorry for the kind of rainbow explosion in your face. But what this is looking back at the last 5 years, or the last 5 Central Economic Work Conferences. And after the Central Economic Work Conference, they publish a readout that will usually, the first half summarizes what happened in the last year. And the second half summarizes a number of kind of major goals. So the number is different each year, but that's sort of what, number one is that I've listed here is literally the number one on their list. And then number two is number two and so on. So this isn't my ranking, this is how the party ranks them. And I've color-coded these so you can kind of see the consistency of some of these things. So yellow, opening up to attract foreign investment, is pretty consistent across this, expanding domestic demand, constructing a modern industrial system, etc. And what I've also done is I've standardized the titles of these so that we have comparability, but the content is functionally the same, or at least covering the same or similar things. Now, what we can see is remarkable consistency the last 5 years, but especially the last 3. There's very, very little movement. And again, what this suggests is continuity. Xi Jinping seems to have a very clear philosophy and ideology about how the economy is meant to be managed. And we've seen that being executed very clearly. Now, of course, officials still have to navigate how these priorities should reflect their own priorities. For example, expanding domestic demand seems to be a top-tier issue every single Central Economic Work Conference, and they talk a lot about it during the NPC, but why are we not seeing meaningful changes and meaningful expansions of domestic demand if it's a top-tier priority? Well, that's where sort of following the leadership and following what Xi Jinping is saying, what Wang Kening is saying, and being able to understand which of these are sort of the key orders that they need to take up, and which of these are signals to try to boost positive sentiment. So when I see expanding domestic demand, and then I don't see Xi Jinping prioritizing that throughout the last few years, if I were a cadre, I would interpret that as this is a signal to try to boost positive energy and sentiment, whereas the dark red one, the construct a modern industrial system and promote scientific and technological innovation, that is something that Xi Jinping never stops talking about. Of course, I'll leave it to Antonio to jump more into detail about that. But understanding how cadres have to navigate this is really important to understanding the party functions like the CEWC, but also the state functions like the NPC. Next slide. And lastly, I want to give a bit more context about the kind of certainty that Xi Jinping has chosen this path and is going to remain on this path. At the very, very end of last year, so on New Year's Eve, the CCP's theory journal, Qiushi, published a speech that Xi Jinping delivered 23 months earlier, so in February 2023, in which Xi Jinping effectively threw down the gauntlet about the idea of Chinese-style modernization, maintaining sort of this political and economic security and this comprehensive notion of security. And throughout the entire speech, he repeatedly emphasizes the need for the Chinese nation to go through a period of protracted struggle with the United States. And he ties together all of the different issues that China's facing, whether it's political security or the challenges facing households. These are all also connected to the external environments, whatever the Americans and their allies are doing. And from all of this, he comes to the conclusion that the only way to overcome this is to move forward, is to not make concessions, to not demonstrate weakness, and that the only way to achieve the long-term goals of the country and to achieve prosperity is to get through this short to medium term of this epochal struggle with the United States. And eventually this leads to this kind of Marxist concept called the realm of freedom, which is basically that the economy has become very fully automated and everything is great and technology is taking care of everything. And then people will finally have the prosperity they want. So Xi Jinping is effectively telling people, eat your bitter vegetables and continue eating your bitter vegetables, and maybe somewhere down the road we can have dessert. But the reason I bring this up is it's really, really important to understand that the last 23 months have been terrible for China's economy, have been terrible for households. And they still decided to take the content of this speech from 23 months ago and effectively publish it for public consumption just at the end of last year, which says a lot that this is the path and we should not expect deviation from it. And I'll pass it over now to Antonia to dive a little deeper into the industrial and technology dimension, which again is often kind of the top priority for these kinds of functions.
Yes, thank you very much, Jacob. And I think to sort of understand what the path is, it is really good to also look at the actual numbers. Now, these are a couple of years old. We didn't manage to get the most recent numbers, but the trends are really there, very similar. One is that we're seeing China is now a global manufacturing power. China's share of global manufacturing is just continuing to rise pretty much. But importantly, the share of loss-making industrial enterprises is pretty much back at the pre-WTO accession level. So that means China is still expanding high-tech manufacturing. They're still investing significantly in high-tech manufacturing, but they're not necessarily making a profit, and this is being tolerated to an extent that it hasn't been really since the WTO accession. This, I think, is a really good example for how Xi Jinping thinks about the economy. And this is also what we're seeing when we go to the next slide and we look at the private sector contribution. Xi Jinping just held the second private sector symposium in his entire sort of reign. And what this really shows is that Xi Jinping is really staying the course. He's focused on new tech and especially AI and manufacturing. So Huawei, CATL, Alibaba, these were the companies that were there. There were additional focus was also agriculture and especially food security. So what this is really about is what can private sector companies do for the party? And a lot of people have speculated about Alibaba and Jack Ma being invited back. To my mind, this is not a sign that Xi Jinping has changed course. This is a sign that Alibaba is now firmly in line with the priorities of the party state. If you look at Alibaba when Jack Ma disappeared, it was really focused on financial services. Now, if you look at the annual reports of Alibaba, it's all focused on AI, all focused on sort of these strategic goals of the party. Alibaba is part of the RISC-V Alliance, which is a domestic idea to replace ARM with an international open source ecosystem that would also further decrease dependence in chip making. So we really see that Alibaba has been rectified, if you want to use the term that was used back in 2021. And this to me is really a sign that shows if you are reformed to the Communist Party. So Jack Ma is reformed by Alibaba being now part of the strategic goals, by Alibaba not being part of financial services as its main contribution to the economy anymore, then you can be invited back. Who was not there was ByteDance, for instance. A lot of these internet services that are some of the most valuable companies in China, they were not there. Now, we don't know if all of them weren't invited. ByteDance, for instance, might also have chosen not to attend if they were invited, because they obviously have these international problems. But this is a really key point, I think. And this is also what we're seeing in the draft private sector promotion law. A lot of the draft private sector promotion law is really about making it clear to the private sector that the private sector can receive support from the party if and only if it follows the party guidance. But if it does, then it can receive support. And colleagues of mine, including Jacob, have actually written about this 2 years ago, I think, that the line between private and state-owned enterprise is blurring to some degree. So Huawei is probably getting more support than some state-owned enterprises, and also probably has more input on some questions than many state-owned enterprises. And we can really see how Xi Jinping has managed to also adapt the private sector to some degree when we're looking at venture capital to internet companies. So internet companies tend to be sort of software companies that to Xi Jinping's mind don't really create value for the economy, because he really believes in the real economy, in manufacturing. And they were really quite important in venture capital transactions, which is also what you would expect. Venture capital tends to go to companies that don't need a great deal of sort of hardware that are software based. But starting in 2019, we actually see a dramatic decrease, not only in venture capital as a whole, that has been documented quite well, but also in venture capital specifically to internet companies. And we see instead that venture capital now goes more to semiconductor companies, more to companies that embody these strategic goals of the Communist Party. And going to the next slide, one of these strategic goals definitely is AI. And especially the inclusion of AI and the real economy. Now, AI will probably be mentioned throughout the two sessions. There was rumors about an AI law. We're not expecting this at this point, partly because there is still some discussions internally of who is responsible. Should an AI law be only regulating AI, or should it also be regulating the development of AI? So we're not really expecting a big law, but we're expecting it to be an underlying priority. And we have seen that in the run-up to this meeting. So just recently, the premier, for instance, had a meeting with China Telecom and other big telcos and told them, hey, you need to do more to actually apply AI and to offer AI services to your customers. We have seen that the state administration for state capital has told its centrally state-owned enterprises that they should adapt more AI in their work. And we also looked at a couple of regional two sessions that pretty much all the regional two sessions already happened. So they usually precede the national two sessions. And AI was really a topic in all of them. So this is really something we are expecting to see. And we also have from our own research just a little bit of interesting, I guess, data looking at how many Chinese party and state documents actually mention AI. And you can see that it's really a lot at this point. It's 9%. If we were only looking at industrial documents, we've looked at that as well. It's actually even more. And we see this growth trajectory of AI has really become very, very important. And importantly, AI is seen as something that can transform the real economy, as something that can provide benefits in a possible conflict with the US, also as something that might be able to sort of solve some of the issues that China is facing in terms of demographics, in terms of a possible middle income trap. And also AI is seen as the way to make sure that China does not let go of lower level manufacturing in the process of upgrading. If you look at all the other countries in the world, everyone has sort of let go of this kind of lower level manufacturing whenever they were upgrading. This is something we've seen in China as well, of like specific of like garment, for instance, isn't produced in China as much as it used to be, but they really want to become self-sufficient in many of these areas and therefore not let go of this low-level manufacturing. If they can't let go of this low-level manufacturing and they don't have the manpower anymore for really producing this, or like for having it be a very manpower driven operation, then what they need is AI and robots. And this is really the big trend that we're seeing, and that we have also seen a lot of delegates at the NPC and at the two sessions go on record in many different newspapers and talking about the importance of AI. So this is just something that I think is important for us in Europe as well to be aware of how critical AI is seen in China, but also how different it is viewed from China than from the US, where in the US it's really about consumer-driven applications. In China, it's about industry-driven applications. And with that, I think I would hand it back to Claudia Wessling, who will probably open it for your questions, and we're looking forward to hopefully answering as many of them as possible.
Yes, thank you very much, Antonia. And I'm waiting for Johannes to bring us all back on the screen here. So what I take away from your inputs, dear colleagues, is that consistency and continuity will be priorities for China in the changing world, and that is what the NPC will show us next week. In a period of protracted struggle with the US, China will not make concessions. It will just stick to its targets that it has formulated long ago. So tech and innovation, supply chain security as priorities, investments into innovation and talent. We will see discussions, very interesting, probably on a new law to support the private sector. This law might not be passed, but what we see already is that only the parts of the private sector who really focus also on the strategic goals of the party will get support. So this is not a sea change in Xi's policies at the end of the day. And AI, Antonia said it, will be an underlying topic in all of the discussions, because just as for the USA, AI is just a super crucial technology for China moving forward, not only in economic, but probably also in military applications. So that said, thanks again, Jacob Ganter, Nis Grünberg, and Antonia Hamaidi for your inputs.